Okay, I showed up at the hospital and I requested an interpreter immediately. And
Lee Parrish will never forget that day in November of 2000 when she was treated in the hospital emergency room.
it was hours and hours later, they still hadn't found one. And then finally one showed up about 3 hours after. She stayed with me for about 20 minutes and then she left. She said she'd call for another interpreter. They weren't showing up, they weren't showing up, they weren't showing up.
Lee waited for several more hours and finally had to call a friend for help. The incident led her to seek help from the Minnesota Disability Law Center and to file a discrimination lawsuit against the hospital. As a result,
they've now required to report that they are fulfilling the needs of the deaf. That's very important, that we know that they're actually following our agreement.
Each year, over 1,200 people contact the Minnesota Disability Law Center for legal representation. The organization provides free services statewide with the mission of advancing the dignity, self-determination, and equality of individuals with disabilities.
We provided about 100 training sessions in 2003, for example, to close to 4,000 consumers, family members, other advocates, and service providers. And that's in addition to our casework.
The work of the Minnesota Disability Law Center began in 1972 with a case against state institutions involving mistreatment of residents. This case resulted in the closing of the institutions, and more importantly, it was the impetus for development of community-based services for people with developmental disabilities.
Funding was shifted from the institutions to community services so that people could either stay living at home, which a lot of children do today, or as they grow older and become adults, live in small group homes in the community.
The work of groups like the Minnesota Disability Law Center has changed the way American institutions treat people with disabilities and has impacts across society. This year, the Minnesota Disability Law Center takes on a special role to register voters in the disability community.
Put this poster up.
Part of the federal Help America Vote Act, these efforts will ensure the participation of hundreds of new voters in the electoral process. The Minnesota Council of Nonprofits is proud to present the 2004 Nonprofit Mission Award for Nonprofit Advocacy to the Minnesota Disability Law Center.